to the Therapy for Black Girls podcast, a weekly conversation about mental health, personal development, and all the small decisions we can make to become the best possible versions of ourselves. I'm your host, Dr. Joy Harden Bradford, a licensed psychologist in Atlanta, Georgia. For more information or to find a therapist in your area, visit our website at therapyforblackgirls.com. While I hope you love listening to and learning from the podcast, it is not meant to be a substitute for a relationship with a licensed mental health professional. Hey y'all, thanks so much for joining me for session 118 of the Therapy for Black Girls podcast. Much of this summer, we've been talking about our relationships with other sisters as a part of our Summer of Sisterhood campaign. And one of the main questions that many of you had was, how do I find friends as an adult? So I had to find someone who could give us the full scoop on this area. Today, you'll get a chance to hear my conversation with Dr. Marisa Franco. Dr. Franco earned her BS in Applied Psychology from New York University and her master's and PhD in Counseling Psychology from the University of Maryland. She has worked as a professor of psychology at Georgia State University and is currently transitioning to work in policy, where she'll be applying research towards bettering people's lives. She has published 20 research articles and has received research grants from the National Institute of Health and the Society for the Psychological Study of Social Issues. She's passionate about making research accessible to the general population and has channeled this passion into writing a book on the psychology of friendship called Platonic. Dr. Franco and I chatted about the most important aspects of making friends, the characteristics of a good friend, and what's really needed to sustain friendships. If you hear anything that really resonates with you as you listen, please be sure to share it with us on social media using the hashtag TBGInSession. Here's our conversation. Thank you so much for joining us today, Dr. Franco.
Thank you so much for having me, Dr. Joy. I'm so excited to be here sharing this information.
Yeah, I'm really glad we connected online because, of course, all throughout the month of July, we were talking about a summer of sisterhood and how we could really, do some work around strengthening our relationships with other sisters and really build on friendships. And so then you shared that this is kind of your area of expertise and you're writing a book about friendship. So I definitely knew we wanted to have you on the podcast so that you could share more information related to this topic.
Yeah, definitely. I got really excited seeing all the posts on your Twitter on friendship and having sort of interactive conversations with other people retweeting. I was like, I'm going to read these and maybe put some of these stories in my book if I need to contact people. So I also love what you all are doing regarding friendship on social media right now.
Thank you. Yeah. It was something that I felt like needed to be addressed because I don't think we often spend enough time talking about our relationships with friends when really so much of our relationships with other people in terms of friendship can really be the lifeline of, just our daily being. But we don't often talk about it. We spend a lot of time talking about healthy romantic relationships, but not necessarily healthy friendships, that are not romantic.
I totally agree with that. And actually, as I write the preface for my book, that's actually my main motivation, looking back at my earlier life, focusing so much on romance at the expense of friendships and thinking, I don't have enough love in my life when I had so much generous amounts of love surrounding me for my friends. And I know as someone who's trained as a psychologist, that's the kind of thinking that contributes to depressive symptoms, where you're zooming into sort of one form of love and excluding and discounting all the other forms of love that are available to you. And so I totally agree. And I think part of my sentiment is someone who's gone through that experience and been I need to turn my energies towards all the love that I have in my life already and recognize that it's there. Put my attention towards that because that is so fulfilling. And there's just that one form of love that is going to benefit people.
Yeah, and I'm glad you bring that up. And, I'm wondering if in your research or in prep for the book, you've come across why that is, right? Why we spend so much time thinking about dating and mating and that kind of thing and not so much time being intentional about our friendships.
Yeah, that's a really good question. I think that this is sort of a strong social message that we get. And it's not something that is innate to us to put relationships on such a hierarchy and put romance so much higher above friends, even when we think legally, like who's able to show up at the hospital with you? Who are you able to, share joint income with? All of these sort of legal restrictions on who can be considered a close relationship, and having friendships excluded from that legally makes me really think about like how I think institutionally as a society, we have created all of these policies that highlight, emphasize romantic relationships and don't leave as much room for really close, meaningful friendships to be as a part of these major life factors like income and hospitalization. And even like, we have a formal ritual for marriage and closeness with our romantic partners, but we don't actually have a formal ritual to indicate that like, this is a really close friend and this is someone that's really important to me. And so I think it's sort of like a downstream consequence of that and of media that like, we really tend to focus more on romance and the importance of romance, even when friendship can benefit us so much.
Really good points. And I wonder if we will see, especially with more kind of progressive thinking, maybe in legislature and, more people with like lots of this kind of energy running for offices, if we will begin to see some changes institutionally in, like who's allowed to be your emergency contact and,
right.
Really kind of yeah, exactly. Going along with this whole idea of the family that you get to create for yourself as opposed to the one that you may be born into.
Yes, definitely.
And I think it also kind of goes to the casualness with which sometimes we approach friendships, right? Like that it can kind of just happen. We don't need to put very much effort into it because there is this kind of societal thinking that, oh, maybe these relationships are not as important.
Yeah, Dr. Joy, like I really want to touch on that because I think that this belief that I've endorsed at certain times in my life that friendships they just happen and they're organic. And that's also like maybe a point of pride that your friendships develop organically and you didn't have to be intentional about them. In the research, assuming that your relationships will happen without effort or organically or based on some sort of friendship magic is actually related to loneliness 5 years later. Whereas those who believe that friendship takes effort were less lonely 5 years later. And the reason was that the people that assume that friendship takes effort were a lot more likely to put themselves out there and engage with people socially. And so I think that's a major limiting belief when it comes to friendships that blocks us from initiating and being intentional about building friendships when people are so intentional again about trying to build romantic relationships, using all of these dating apps. But something about friendship makes people think, we have to leave it up to this magic. And that is actually harming people's ability to build relationships with others.
Yeah, but I think a lot of it maybe comes from, when you are in grade school and when you go into college, like there's almost this built-in, just set of people who could become friends. And so you become friends with people who are in the same clubs and teams with you, or you working on a project together. And, so I think that's where some of this organic piece comes from, in that these people are kind of always around. And so they are who becomes your friend set. And I think that's a part of why people struggle when they leave like the collegiate setting, because then there is not necessarily this built-in like coming together of a bunch of people that you can then choose from to be friends.
Yeah, I definitely agree with that. I think sociologists have actually worked to like break apart what is that organicity and what are the factors that are at play when friendships do develop organically. And so there's a couple of ingredients, and they're continuous unplanned interaction and shared vulnerability. So if we're in a space where those ingredients are present, then friendships are more likely to sort of develop, even if we're not aggressive about them, we're not intentional about them. And so I think when we're in our younger years, high school, college, we are inhabiting spaces where we have continuous unplanned interaction and shared vulnerability through our classes, through our college dorming. And so as we get older, as we become adults, we have less and less access to that as sort of natural occurrence in our lives that might occur, for example, at work, but work associates are often sort of smaller than our friendship potential associates at a high school and college. And so I think because of that, we no longer have those ingredients. But I think one way to approach friendship too is to think about how can I put myself in contexts and spaces which allow for continuous unplanned interaction and shared vulnerability. And so for those people who really like the idea of friendships developing organically, think about like joining an improv class, joining a language class, doing different things to be a part of an environment that allows for those specific ingredients.
So can you talk to me, Dr. Franco, more about the idea of it being unplanned? Like, what is the need for it to be unplanned as opposed to making a plan to continue to see somebody?
See, I think the unplanned piece is just that it's more likely to happen consistently if it's unplanned, if it's like we all have to be at this class. Whereas if we leave it up to ourselves, then it's more possible that we won't follow up or we won't be as intentional. And I think some people's fears come up. I think reading into this research on friendship, the fear of rejection is so central to being a major barrier to people's friendship development. So it may be like, you like someone, you've hung out, but now like in order to continue to meet up, you kind of have to put yourself out there. Whereas the unplanned interaction, it sort of allows people to not have to continue to put themselves out there and risk rejection. So it just makes things kind of easier.
Got it. Okay. So you have shared two things that I definitely want to make sure that we dig into more because they also came up within this month of conversations we were having about friendships. You shared some about like vulnerability and this fear of rejection, which I think are huge for people, right? Like nobody wants to sign up to kind of have the door slammed in their face. And so talk to me more about some of this fear of rejection and maybe how people can kind of move past that to become or be in a better position to make some of these friendships.
So one of the best advice that I have for people to make friends is to assume that everybody likes them. And so that takes honestly actively telling yourself like, people like me in this environment and like having that be the new running dialogue that you create. Because the thing is, when you're fearing rejection, and so social anxiety is part and parcel with that. People who experience a lot of social anxiety, they're always fearing rejection. What happens is those fears, what's going on in your head affects your behaviors, and you become more likely to withdraw, to be looking at your phone the entire time, to be doing things that will actually make people reject you because you're not engaging with them. And again, other people are afraid of rejection too. So if they try to approach you and you're like on your phone all the time, then they might be less likely to follow up with you. And so that's why I think fear of rejection can really inhibit us because that fear manifests as our behaviors. We engage in these self-protective behaviors that actually sabotage our ability to make friendship. And so when we think about these behaviors, there's sort of two types that go along with fear of rejection. So we might engage in what's called overt or covert avoidance. Overt avoidance is I really fear rejection, so I'm not even going to show up to that party. I'm not going to show up to that networking event. I'm not going to show up to that class. Covert avoidance is when you show up to the event, but you don't engage with people. You're completely disengaged, or you're keeping to yourself, or you're not introducing yourself to people. And so I think when we target fears of rejection and making ourselves feel more secure and reminding ourselves that like other people like us and that be our new running belief, then we're allowed to target that overt avoidance to get us to show up. And also that covert avoidance, which means when we get there, we are going to be intentional about introducing ourselves to people and engaging with people.
Ooh, I like this. Okay. So, I mean, and we've talked about this, I think, even in previous episodes about even just giving yourself a time limit to go to a certain place. So you're feeling really anxious about this party. Can you go for just an hour and interact with people? And then if it feels too overwhelming, then you've done your kind of due diligence. You at least got there and tried to interact with people.
Yeah, I love that idea. I think too, like, I just want to mention that the research shows that we're actually really bad at predicting our own likability. So like the biggest predictor of people's ratings of their own likability is their last social interaction. So people use their last social interaction to indicate how likable, how charming they are. And so I think what really underlies this social anxiety is the fear of not being enough or that other people are going to dislike you. But we're actually really, really bad judges of that. And I share that information to encourage people to challenge that, like the thoughts that you're having about your self-worth, about your worthiness in interactions are actually like really not very correlated with how other people actually experience you. And the only time that social anxiety is related to other people liking you less is when that social anxiety manifests as behavior. So even if you're feeling these things, if your thoughts are making you feel unworthy, if you engage in behaviors like engaging with other people, introducing yourself to other people, being warm towards other people, then people actually don't suspect that you're socially anxious at all.
So let me just back us up for a minute and make sure that we are clear on what you're saying. So you're saying that we are not usually the best judges of whether people like us as much, and that people typically do like us much more than we sometimes think in our heads.
Well, I wouldn't say that people necessarily like us, just that we're really off. We're
Got
really
it.
off. Yes, but it pays for the default assumption for us to have to be that others like us, because then that will encourage us to put ourselves out there more.
Okay, got you. But I want to also then bring, the cultural piece in, because I think specifically as Black women, I think, again, societally and culturally, there is a lot of Black women are too loud, or it's tough to get along with you, or all of these things, right? That I think a lot of us are also bringing into social situations. And so I'm curious about any thoughts you have about how to then dismantle those kinds of beliefs when we are often fed that.
You know what? I think that's a really great point. I think a lot of us carry baggage around racism, and we're censoring ourselves. And because of that, censoring yourself, what the research shows is that takes energy from your brain. So you're less likely to do other things and be able to put yourself out there because you're so focused on this self-censoring. So that just takes away from your resources in terms of being able to connect with people. And it's hard, I think, because I want to share sort of a balanced truth in that it pays again to assume that people are going to treat you as well as possible and that you're going to be affirmed. But again, that's not always the reality for Black women or Black people who often, face rejection and these race-based stereotypes. And so I think it's holding both truths. I think it's part of it is still assuming positivity, but being able to have what's called a secure base, which is when you don't receive that positivity out in the world, that you have people that you can come back to replenish yourself, where you can feel connected. Maybe that's with your sisters, somewhere where you feel I'm worthy and I feel valued and this feels really easy. And that again helps you to build up, I guess, the wherewithal to go out into a social world that is not always kind to you as a person of African descent.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So thinking, one bad interaction does not mean that you are a bad person. It could just mean that you and that person don't click. It doesn't mean that nobody will like you.
Yeah, Dr. Joy, I've been thinking about this so much. What is the key to making friends with people? And I think us using the terms liking, not liking is not accurate or in good service. I think what it's more about is attunement. And the attunement is about I'm anticipating what another person's needs are regarding friendships, and I am able to meet that. An attuned relationship works. So for example, maybe someone's a new mom and they really want to focus on their kids and family and they don't have a lot of time to make friends right now. And so you might want to make friends with them, but that might be misattuned with what their needs are in this given time, right? So the timing may be off. And so for some of us, maybe we're new to a city and we're trying to make these friends and we're reaching out to people a lot, but other people in those cities already have established friendship groups. So they're sort of less likely to want to hang out all the time. And so I think it's really about more about attunement than dislike in terms of what are people looking to add to their life right now? And do our needs match what other people are looking for as well? And so I think that's really one of the strong predictors of whether we'll be able to continue to build a friendship.
Okay, so you're suggesting kind of being more focused on, is there something that seems likely that I could add to this person's life and vice versa at this given time?
Exactly. Not oh, I guess I'm not likable, or I guess they don't like me because they're not able to hang out with me right now. Just realize there's so many factors that go into whether someone is willing to build a relationship or a friendship with you that are so outside of who you are as a person. And usually people make judgments about friendships pretty early on. And so they don't even really know you and the depth of who you are. And so maybe you're someone who shows more of yourself over time. And so what I really encourage people to do is again, challenging their limiting beliefs around when they feel like they're rejected, that's actually just a misattunement or an incompatibility at this time.
Got it. And I think, that often comes up in friendships that are already formed, right? So you've been friends with somebody for years now, and then she becomes a new mom and then maybe has less time and, things kind of get off kilter. But then you have the history of that relationship to maybe be able to kind of withstand that kind of a change, whereas you might not with a new person.
Yes, Dr. Joy, definitely. And I think what you're alluding to is backed up by the research, in that the research shows that so when a relationship has more costs, it basically it negatively affects the relationship. For example, if I have to commute a long way to see you, then we're less likely to be friends. But if you're already close, costs are way less likely to affect the continuance or the development of the relationship. So at the beginning, it's sort of more of a fragile period in that if a smaller thing goes wrong, it can have more of a stronger ramification on the relationship. Whereas once your friendship is already developed and set, your relationship will be a lot stronger and more fortified, so that if conflict happens and negative events happen, you'll be a lot more likely to be able to work it out and continue the relationship.
Oh, Dr. Franco. So are you saying that kind of early in a relationship, most of us are probably doing this cost benefit analysis?
Unfortunately, kind of, yes. And it's honestly because we don't know someone holistically. I think this happens in dating too, right? Where it's I don't know, like, I just remember, like, I have a friend, for example, and like, one of our friends was like licking his fingers after eating nachos. And she was like, he's just himself. He does him. He does whatever he wants. And I just really appreciate that about him. And she goes on a date with this guy and he does the same thing. And she's like, I was just so grossed out by it. Like, it was so disgusting. And so I think, like, I just share that story because I think it reflects how, like, we relate to the same action differently when it's someone that we're close to and when it's someone we built a relationship with it, because we see them holistically and we see like that even if they have this like flaw to them, then that's part of like a larger group of qualities, many of which we like. So it just doesn't matter as much.
And I think, that also helps to take some of your ego and some of this like connecting self-worth to friendship, because in a lot of ways it's a numbers game and it's a time game and it's not necessarily so much about who you are.
Exactly. Like, it's really about so many factors. And I think the people who win in this friendship game, in terms of like the ones who really develop the closest and most relationships or whatever feels most fulfilling for you, is like the people who are able to persist. Mm-hmm. And again, that just involves overcoming some of these barriers related to like fears of rejection, difficulties with putting yourself out there, lack of like engagement or intentionality about initiating with people.
Okay. So I want to go back to the part of kind of putting yourself out there, because again, this came up a lot in our discussions about people just being afraid of being vulnerable. Maybe they have been burned in relationships in the past or have had some, traumatic experiences around kind of putting themselves out there and being thrown in their faces. So what kinds of suggestions do you have related to that, of how do you become more vulnerable, especially in a new friendship?
Okay. I love that you brought this question up, because reading I'll like self-disclose myself in this question. Reading the research on friendship has really changed my own engagement with like self-disclosing and vulnerability. I think like for me, I'm always someone who loves to listen to other people, trained as a psychologist, and thinking that like, if I share myself, I'm going to burden someone or turn them off. But like what the research actually shows is like self-disclosure on both ends is the lifeblood of relationships, like disclosing things about yourself and welcoming disclosures from other people. So if you're similar to how I was, or maybe what I'm still working through, and thinking that like you have to be a vault, you're going to burden other people, people aren't going to like you if you disclose stuff about yourself, that's actually causing harm to your relationships and your ability to build intimacy with other people. And so I think just sort of fact checking was helpful for me in terms of like thinking about vulnerability and how to share vulnerability. And I think too, like I also want to contextualize this socially. So like people back in descent, we've been taught not to trust people, to be more cautious because of our history, because like that orientation was very adaptive given our history. And so we have to think through like, for every like strategy that we're engaging in, behavior that we're engaging in, what are the benefits, but also what are the costs? Like not trusting other people, sure, that might benefit us in that we might be less vulnerable to being exploited, but there's also like strong cost to that, in that we have less intimate relationships, we feel less close to people. Like intimacy is actually based on the Latin word innermost. So there really is no intimacy without vulnerability and being able to share yourself. So, I just really encourage people to be open to sharing more of themselves, because that is sort of the vital blood of relationships.
But is there a line, Dr. Franco? Because I think that there is, in terms of like sharing and then oversharing.
Yes.
And I think that this is a part of where people struggle with, is like, how much do I share to let you know me, but how do I not share so much that I'm like overwhelming?
That is a great point. And I think that actually is reflected by the research. I remember reading this study that was like, when people disclose about like their history of childhood abuse and trauma in initial interaction, people were actually turned off. Whereas when they disclosed on like their like dreams and aspirations in initial interaction, people were turned on and they wanted to connect with them more. And so I think there definitely is a limit. And so we can think about self-disclosure as a range or a spectrum. And so like it is self-disclosing for you just to disclose any of your internal world, any of your thoughts or experiences, any of how you might relate to the things that are happening around you that might be distinct from the people around you. And so that's just sort of what I would encourage, like initially, like that form of self-disclosure, like what was your unique thoughts in relationship to what's going on around you? How did you relate to this experience that you might have gone through with someone else? And that is, I think, where self-disclosure begins. And then it deepens as we talk about, our childhood struggles, the sort of deeper, darker sides, or deepest, darkest secrets, as we used to say. And so, like, I think first of all, like the whole reason I should say that self-disclosure builds relationships is because when we self-disclose to someone, the assumption is that we trust them and we like them and we feel close to them. And so people take that to mean like, oh, this person is self-disclosing to me, so they like me. And that makes me feel closer to them. But when you are indiscriminate about self-disclosing, people don't feel like they've earned your self-disclosure, and they don't feel like you are necessarily disclosing because you like them, maybe because you like need someone to vent to. And so like, because of that, I think hyper self-disclosure doesn't make people feel like they've sort of earned this closeness to you that has merited self-disclosure in the same way.
That is such a good point, Dr. Franco. I love that you have like all of this research to kind of share the back up all of this, right? You know, which I think is also great because it just shows you how differently like we operate as psychologists, right? Like this is clearly your world in terms of the research, whereas I'm, you know, much more on the practitioner side, and so do some of the research, but not nearly as much of this research as you are.
Well, that's what I'm here from the book, you know?
Exactly. It's just fascinating to me. But I also think a lot of times what happens when people get into this oversharing, it feels like it's like, let me lay all these cards out on the table so that you know what you're getting into. And if you still like me, then maybe we can move forward. But actually, you're kind of doing yourself a disservice by leading with that too soon.
Right. And like, we know that like it's human nature for it to be more of a cost benefit thing at the very beginning. So we can't start litmus testing people before we've built relationships with them. Like, why should they continue to like us when we've over disclosed? Like, we haven't built a foundation of a relationship for them to do that. And so I think a lot of people, specifically people who fear rejection, are more vulnerable to engaging in these like litmus tests. Like, I'm going to test this relationship by doing this and seeing how it comes out. And like, I don't know, just thinking about perspective taking the other person, like how costs work out in relationships for us to know how much to disclose and what is appropriate to disclose.
Yeah. And I think it's important, you know, especially because I think a lot of that kind of litmus testing develops as a trauma response, right? That, you know, you've had bad experiences or traumatic experiences. And so then you're trying to test whether this is going to be another one. And while some of that, I think, has been a survival skill for a lot of people, you can see why it might not work out long term, because then it can be a put off for new people.
Yeah, I think you're exactly right. And I really appreciate you bringing in that perspective in terms of like what trauma does to people and how trauma affects their interpersonal relationships, because I think trauma fundamentally makes people feel unworthy, and it just makes it really hard to connect with people when you're feeling that way. And it's really a lot scarier when you're going through a trauma. And so I think because of that, like there are specific vulnerabilities in this process that are really difficult for people that have gone through something traumatic.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. So when we were talking before, Dr. Franco, you also shared that making good friends is not really about being charismatic and witty. It's really about loving and taking care of other people.
Yes.
And so I want to hear more about how you can do that, but also respect boundaries. Because I think sometimes, again, especially as Black women, we get into this caretaking piece and then realize that the relationship has not been reciprocal. So how do you do that in a way that shows that you care, but that still, you know, leave some room for it to be reciprocal?
Yes. So there are so many fascinating things that are going on in my mind that I want to share about this topic. So there's this theory called equity theory. And what it indicates is that people don't like to underbenefit from their friendships. They don't like to give more than they get, but they also don't like to overbenefit. They don't like to get more than they receive, because that makes them feel really guilty and really uncomfortable and like they owe you something. And so we might feel that like if we give, that'll help us build a stronger relationship, when actually if we're over giving, we put people in a place where they feel kind of uncomfortable. And so I think that's really important to keep in mind. I think there are ways to give that don't feel boundary crossing. And so one of the most important aspects of building friendships is just being able to affirm other people. Tell them how much you appreciate them, how what they said touched you, how it stirred you, how you love these qualities or characteristics about them. Affirmation of other people is one of the keys to friendship. If you ever like heard an interview with Oprah, you will see how much she affirms people. And like, I think she's like one of the biggest friendship relationship building experts. She'll tell you about the aha moments, the tweetable moments. And so as I read this research, I'm like, I see how much people feel so safe around her because she is so good at just affirming people and affirmation. So what the research says again is that there's different things that are likely to build the relationships at different time points. And so like we said, with intimacy, you know, more deeper intimacy being more appropriate later in the relationship. But what the research shows is actually that affirmation of other people bonds the relationship no matter what stage it is at. So even when you're just making friends or when you're further into a relationship, affirmation is always food and nourishment for any relationship. And so I think when you think about giving in terms of not just you like having to give up all your time for someone or having to do all of these things for them, but just being able to affirm people, that's always a safe way to give.
So I think instead of thinking about what can I do or what can I buy to kind of continue this friendship, it really is just about affirming the other person just as a person.
Exactly. And so something I wanted to touch on too, because I was listening to your discussion earlier of like the Black superwoman approach and how, you know, as Black women, we're so primed to give to other people and to be so nurturing and to like really be considerate of other people around us. And so what the research calls this is communalism or mutualism. And people that are more communal and mutual, they do have better relationships. They're happier and other people are happier around them. But the caveat is what's called unmitigated communalism. And that's when you are giving to other people at a cost to yourself. And when that happens, communalism doesn't benefit people as much. It doesn't make people happier. It doesn't make the people they're in a relationship happier. It makes the relationship better overall, but it doesn't provide as much benefits as when we are communal, but also considering ourselves.
So there is a point at which we talked about, right? There is a point at which you doing too much is not good for either you or the other person.
Exactly. And like, you know, like I said, with equity theory, like when you do too much, you activate a sense of guilt or discomfort, or people are actually really uncomfortable when you give to them and they're not able to give back. And so like when we overgive, we can actually make the other person more uncomfortable and also feel like it's at a greater cost to yourself. And like, I don't know about other people, but when I give to a lot to another person and they're not reciprocating, I also get really frustrated. And I'm like, why aren't you reciprocating? And I think, you know, something to do, like if you notice that that's happening, is to be able to pull back and realize it's actually going to benefit this friendship if I give less.
Yes, that actually came up in the conversation during the month, you know, the Summer of Sisterhood, in that people expect other people to kind of be the kinds of friends that they are, but there's never been a conversation about any of these expectations, right? So You're thinking, I'm showing up for this person. I'm there in their time of need. I'm there to drive them to the airport. Like I do all of these things. And then the expectation is that this other person will do these same things for me, but the other person is not even aware that is the expectation.
That's a really good point, because I think another thing about the research that blew my mind, the best predictor of whether you get support from other people is actually whether you ask for it.
Oh, so not whether you give the support, but whether you ask for it.
Whether you ask for it, whether you actually ask for it. And so like, and that actually asking for support actually makes relationships more intimate. So you may think that, oh, if I ask for this for someone, I'm going to harm the relationship. I may be asking for one. But once you like are forming a relationship with someone and you ask for their support, again, that's sort of like identity affirming for them. Like they're willing to turn towards me. They must really like me. And so asking for support for someone actually makes your relationship closer. And it also makes you more likely to get support in the future. Whereas people that don't ask for a relationship, they end up having less intimacy in their relationships, and they're less likely to get support from in the future.
Got it. Wow. I definitely want to make sure we bookmark that and people are paying attention to that, because I do think a lot of people think the way to get support, like the whole idea of to get a good friend, you have to be a good friend. And so the expectation is that if I do these things, they will do these things in return, where the research, it sounds like, really suggests that you have to ask for these things.
You have to ask for it. Asking is the secret to getting support. But I also want to say, like, related to what you brought up around trauma, who's most likely to ask for support? We think it's maybe like the people that are most desperate or like don't have their shit together. But what it actually is the people that feel the best about themselves. It's the people that have higher self-esteem, the people that feel like they are in more control of their environments. They are the people that are most likely to ask for support. And so if we're consistently not asking for support, I think it behooves us to think a little bit about our identities and what might make us feel not worthy of getting support from other people. And so again, part of this is cultivating that sense of security within yourself, that you're worth something, that you have something to benefit people. And because of that, you are more optimistic that if you ask for support, people will actually want to give it to you because you know and understand that you're worthy. And so, I also just sort of wanted to highlight that, like, there is a bit of self-work that goes into the behavior of being able to ask for help.
Yes, that is a great point, Dr. Franco. And I think, it kind of goes back to some other conversations we've had here on the podcast, just about one, going back to the whole strong Black woman thing, but also connected to this idea that, like, I am the one in my family who has it all together. And there is nobody else to ask because I'm the one who's kind of holding it together for everybody else.
Mm-hmm.
So I think for some people, it may feel like a reality that there is nobody else to ask for support.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, I certainly get and understand that. I think even as I offer these tips, I'm like, I also want to empathize with people that this is actually really difficult to do. So I really appreciate you, Dr. Joy, in terms of mentioning that it's also really hard for people to implement these tips. And I think what I'm really going for in my book, Platonic, it's instead of it being oh, these are all the hot tips for friendship, it's also exploring our underlying psychological architecture and how that makes us more or less likely to engage in these things that really benefit our relationships.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So I think, again, it could be a both and, right? Like, this is what the research suggests, but also looking at what is your personal history and how might it be difficult for you to do some of these things that may actually make you or allow you to have more fulfilling friendships.
Exactly. It starts with, and I feel like I've seen those, I don't know, in sayings before, you have to love yourself before others can love you. And, I kind of disagree with that because I think we love ourselves through other people loving us. But I also see how if you love yourself, you engage in more behaviors that are fruitful for your relationship, such as not assuming rejection, because when we do assume rejection, we're actually more likely to be judgmental of the other person because now there's someone who has rejected us. And so there's just ways that if you come to a place where you're at peace with yourself, your worth, you are able to again do things like give people more grace when they don't fulfill your expectations, and have more perspective taking for people, because when you're in a lot of acute pain around things and you're really suffering, it's really hard to perspective take and understand that this is another person with their own needs and their own life that's going on. And so because of that, you can sort of be more scornful or take it more personally when things don't go right in relationships. And so I think what underlies a lot of these really positive friendship behaviors is developing some sense of security with yourself.
Thank you. Thank you for that. So something else, kind of going back to our earlier conversation around how much focus there is on how we have healthy romantic relationships. Something else that I think is often missing in terms of friendship stuff is how to have conversations with friends when things are not going well, or how you can acknowledge some of these feelings of guilt or shame that pop up in a friendship. Is there anything that you've run across in the research that talks about how we might be able to cultivate that kind of space better in our friendships?
Yes. So this is another hot tip from the research. I love the research. I love the research so much. But just because it's just so much wisdom to me, I'm oh, this is so helpful. I get so much wisdom. But so engaging in conversations around conflict can actually make your relationship stronger. So I think people's fears when they engage in these direct conversations about how their relationship is going is that it's going to really damage the relationship, or the other person is going to end up rejecting them. But there are ways that you can engage in conflict and it actually leads for your relationship to be stronger. And part of that is just expressing your truth and not blaming the other person. So for example, I did feel kind of hurt when you didn't show up at my recital or something like that. Instead of saying it was really shitty of you that you didn't show up. You're my recital, and it's really a problem that you did that. Just focusing and owning our own feelings with those I statements, and expressing and staying at the level of emotion, not getting caught up in the you did this, you did that, but how did that make you feel, and sharing your feelings without blaming the other person. And this is really hard, I will say. You should not do this when you are really angry at your friend, when they just slighted you, and it's really hard to regulate your emotions, because you want to be in a place where you can be calm, because when you feel really angry, you're more likely to blame people, and it's going to be harder to have that conversation without being blaming. So I would say pause, get to a place where, your emotions have come down a bit, and then engage and use those I statements in terms of how things made you feel, and share your perspective.
Yes, and we talk about this, of course, a lot in therapy too. Like a lot of times, clients will be afraid to say that they feel like the therapist has offended them in some way, or that something they suggested wasn't quite the best fit, and so they're afraid to kind of come back to the therapist and say that. But actually, those are the moments I live for as a therapist, right? Especially for somebody who has difficulty, maybe kind of expressing their needs and wants, or has issues with authority or something like that. That is a golden opportunity for me to kind of affirm, what a big deal this was for you to come back and tell me this, and how can we create more of this in your life? And look, this doesn't rupture our relationship. I still value you as a client, and I appreciate that you felt safe enough here to share something that didn't quite fit for you.
Yes, because I think like part of being a good friend is honestly wanting the best for our friends, like being able to like be really happy in our friend's success. Like that's what makes for really close relationships. And so there aren't caveats to that when you might be contributing to some of your friends' distress. Wanting the best for your friend is being able to take seriously like, oh, I did something that harmed this relationship. And like, I want my friend to be happy. I don't want my friend to be in distress. And so being able to take that in as an invitation to build a closer relationship with someone, I think when you're on the receiving end of these conversations, rather than as attack or as a threat, but like an invitation from the other person to be able to get closer to you and in the service of your goal as a close friend for your friend to live their happiest and healthiest and most fulfilling life.
Love it. I cannot wait for this book, Dr. Franco. So I'm like, where can we get this advanced copy? I would like for you to tell us more like about what we can expect. So the name of the book is Platonic.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
So what can we expect to kind of get there besides the gems that you have dropped now?
So, Dr. Joy, honestly, I'm trying to. So, when I love like self-help books, just to disclose about myself, but I think like an issue that I have with them is that the helper often positions themselves as someone who's above it all, who doesn't actually face the problems and the issues that are happening. Like they've solved friendship, and like friendship is so many things. It is like existential dread around loneliness, isolation, belonging, acceptance, affirmation. All these really deep, powerful human things that are never solved. And so for me, like as I'm writing this book, I'm trying to be honest and vulnerable about myself and to share like, okay, I've learned this in the research and I've tried to apply it in my own life. And here were some of the hangups and here's where things work. And so I think it's the research, but it's also that integrated with like my real world experience. I haven't gotten this far yet, but I'm going to be interviewing people, conducting focus groups, doing things like that, just to say that like, it's one thing to read about something and to understand things in sort of a knowledge way. But I think it's a completely different act to be able to engage in that experientially in your life. And so like just knowing information isn't going to help your friendship unless you're intentional about applying these things to your life. And so I want to sort of be a model for my readers of like, this is what it's going to be like when you actually apply this information to your life.
Love it. Okay. So do we have at all like a date where it might be coming out, or we just will have to stay tuned?
Oh, it's going to be a long, long time, Dr. Joy. I just finished the proposal today.
Oh, okay. Yes. Okay. So we're very early on.
I've done all the research at this point, but like, yes, I'm constructing I finished the proposal. And so I'm thinking like, hopefully pending the process of getting an agent / publisher, this might take like about a year.
Got you. Okay. So audience, please stay tuned for the bestseller that she will release on us. So I'm curious, you've already shared lots of research for us, and I love that you have shared the research in a way that is so like, non-jargony, like anybody can understand what's going on. Are there other books or resources that you have come across that you think would be helpful for people to check out related to friendship?
Yes, I'm going to share with your readers the books that have changed my life. Okay. So one of I think the most important books about relationships that I've ever read is Bell Hook's book, All About Love. And so she talks about how love is helping other people express themselves more deeply in the ways that they are living and supporting their spiritual growth. And I was like, bam, like love is not dominance. Love is not control. Like that is not love. Love is like helping someone express their truth. That is the most beautiful thing I've like ever heard. So I would definitely recommend All About Love by Bell Hooks. In terms of another book, So I'm hesitant to offer this book because it's actually about romantic relationships, but I also think that it's really, really good and can help people understand like some of their baggage around relationships. And it also applies to friendships. And so that book is called Attached by Amir Levine. Yeah, that's a really good one. What I would also suggest is if folks are having trouble with like being angry or being hostile towards other people or not trusting other people or, really want to be a better friend, there's this meditation called loving kindness meditation. You can just like Google it on YouTube. And it's really, really helpful for like opening yourself up more to relationships. And so like if someone really wants to engage in the practice of priming themselves to be more open to building relationships, then I would definitely recommend that they try loving kindness meditation.
Is that Tara Brach stuff?
I think Tara Brach does do one type of loving kindness meditation, but there's a lot of other folks who do it.
Okay, so this is just a general meditation.
Yeah, exactly.
Okay.
It's like connecting to others' humanity.
Got you. Okay. Anything else?
I really did want to share this last point. You can tell I'm excited about all this. So while I'm doing this research, I'm really thinking about the idea of like humanity and like humanity being about caring for other people, helping other people, being able to like have empathy for other people. But as I'm reading this research, sort of realizing that like, unfortunately, often our sense of humanity is circumscribed to people that we feel close to and people that we have relationships with. And like the word humanity is like, it sort of like reflects that like this is some aspect of human nature, but actually like our caring, our loving side, our empathic side comes out so much more when we feel close to other people. And so like that to me means that like if you want other people to treat you well in your life, whether that's at work or I don't know, at the coffee shop or with your friends, like developing close relationships with them is central to basically living in a world where other people are more willing to treat you with so much humanity. And it's like, it's unfortunate that that's the case. And we see that happening politically, but I think like, it's a point that I've really been thinking about in terms of like who people are most likely to be nice to and go out of their way to. And I think closer relationships are really one of the strong predictors of that.
Love it. Thank you for sharing that, Dr. Franco. So where can people find you online? How can they connect?
The best place to find me is going to be on my Twitter, where I'm going to start posting more tips related to friendship. And so you can find me at Marisa G. Franco. That's Marisa G. Franco.
Perfect. And of course, we will include all of that in our show notes. Well, thank you so much for spending this time with us today, Dr. Franco, and sharing this wealth of information. I really appreciate it.
Thank you. It was so fun. I'm like so excited to share this stuff. I'm just like, people need to know this stuff.
Yes, I love it. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
I'm so glad Dr. Franco was able to share her expertise with us today. To learn more about her or to check out the books that she shared, visit the show notes at therapyforblackgirls.com/session118. If you love this conversation, please do me a favor and share this episode with 2 of your girls. And don't forget to share your takeaways with us in your IG stories or on Twitter using the hashtag TBGInSession. If you want to continue digging into this topic and meet some other sisters in your area, come on over and join us in the Yellow Couch Collective, where we take a deeper dive into the topics from the podcast and just about everything else. You can join us at therapyforblackgirls.com/YCC. And if you're searching for a therapist in your area, be sure to check out our therapist directory at therapyforblackgirls.com/directory. Thank y'all so much for joining me again this week. I look forward to continuing this conversation with you all real soon. Take good care.